Welcome to QI Foundations. This is part one of a two-part series where we introduce some of the important tools and quality improvement that can help you get started in projects whilst on your placements. One of the questions that we often get asked is, why should we get involved in quality improvement? Quality improvement serves as a means to systematically analyse a large service such as the NHS, looking at individual parts or cogs on the wheel to try and work out what parts need to be optimised to improve care for your patients. As we're going to discuss, sometimes very small changes to this system can have a very large impact on patients. Solutions can come from anywhere, and we aim to empower you as the main driver to improve quality improvement in your practice. The learning outcomes for our session are to first recognise the model for improvement, to utilise QI project planning tools, to recall different types of QI intervention and list some examples, and finally, list the steps of a PDSA cycle. Historically, quality improvement was something reserved for senior management and senior leads for the medical and nursing hierarchy. Ideas would filter down from the trust initiatives or from senior government, would then be strategised in management meetings and ways implemented to try and reduce cost and improve the patient journey. Typically, this would filter down until we got to the main drivers of change, which would be yourself, the more junior staff. And unfortunately, in this model, you're at the very bottom of the pyramid at a very small level, where your ideas are not taken into consideration quite as much. However, research would suggest that you're the best person to drive these changes. You have got the best experience of the processes in place and how they actually work. And you also have the most contact directly with patients. So you're actually the best person to know what your patients want and how you can change this. So in fact, you have one of the most important roles, not the least. The modern strategy is to involve all staff and empower them to engage in quality improvement. We use the Model for Improvement tool in order to structure this. The first part is asking 3 questions in every QI project you plan to do. The first part is asking the question, what are we trying to accomplish? The more specific your aim, the easier it is to achieve. The next part is, how do we know if a change idea is actually an improvement? And you might be surprised how often we actually make the system worse rather than better. And the final question is, what changes can we make that will result in this improvement? This is where your change ideas can be implemented that can all work together to help show a positive result in your system. And this is a new triangle. We train junior staff how to do QI, which feeds their own ideas, their own projects that all come together to help improve the trust. Senior management and QI teams can then help to mentor and direct these projects to ensure we all get the best result that we possibly can. That all may sound quite idealistic. However, quality improvement is all about teamwork. Everyone should get involved, regardless of level. By bringing people with different skills, different ideas and different viewpoints together, we can implement novel solutions that can make a big difference to our patient's journey. When I first got involved in quality improvement, I was over-enthusiastic, determined to make a large change to massively improve the system. However, the NHS is complicated, and there are rarely any quick fixes that can make an instrumental change to the system. A lot of quality improvement is about the concept of marginal gains. Much like a runner, shaving off a tenth of a second can actually make a big difference in the long term. And when you start to get involved in quality improvement, sometimes starting small is the best idea. A small project might create a small but sustainable change. That can lead to what might seem a very small gain. However, like in a sporting analogy, achieving lots of small gains over time can make a very large difference to an individual patient journey and improve their quality of life. One of the ways that we can find a QI project is by looking at the Swiss cheese model. The Swiss cheese model is an accident causation model that's frequently used in businesses. This specific example talks about all of the safety measures that are in place to stop a major fire incident. And it's only when all of these slices of cheese come together and all the holes line up exactly can harm occur. All these cheese slices represent barriers to something going wrong. And the same is true of the NHS. The systems are in place to prevent harm from occurring. And as daft as it sounds, The NHS is full of cheese. There are lots of ways to prevent harm from occurring. However, it still can. Patients, for example, can still get the wrong type of blood, which could cause harm. And a quality improvement way of thinking of an accident when something goes wrong is not to blame colleague X, Dr. Y or Nurse Z, but to try and work out exactly what holes were exploited in this particular example that led to harm. We can then employ more slices of cheese at that particular level to prevent the same thing from happening again. But how do you know what project to make? How do you know what's a good slice of cheese? Perhaps the most important part of quality improvement is in project planning. As I often say, if you do not plan to succeed, you're just preparing to fail. All of these tools I'm going to cover are going to be described to give you a flavour of what you can use for your own projects. If you want to learn more about any of these tools, I would refer you on to the NES Quality Improvement Zone, a learning tool that gives you workbooks and examples to use these tools in your own practice. The first QI project planning tool I want to cover is process mapping. There are two types of process mapping. We're going to first cover the high-level process map, sometimes called the view from 30,000 feet. This can be used early in projects to identify boundaries and stakeholders. So for example, looking at a pathway in A&E. There are usually only 5 to 8 steps. In this example, I talk about my morning routine. So what I do every morning is I buy bread, I buy butter, I buy a toaster from Argos, I drive home, I plug in this toaster, I put in the bread, and I take out my toast and butter my toast. If I wanted to save a few minutes off my morning routine, would I be best placed to make a QI project at the end, taking out my toast or improving the butter? Well, probably not. And only by looking at all of the stages we can realise that buying a toaster every single morning does not seem a good use of my time. If I were just to have one toaster and keep it there, I could save probably half an hour every single morning and improve my morning commute. And although this is a pretty simple example, it is only by taking a step back that you can appreciate the bigger picture. If we were to take a patient pathway through A&E, for example, we could identify an earlier step that's not necessary and can be removed, eliminating waste and ultimately improving that patient's journey. The next project planning tool I want to cover is a Pareto chart. A Pareto chart allows you to look at where the key stakeholders are in your intervention. Say you want to reduce the number of falls that occur in your hospital. Well, it'll be common sense, but we should know that all wards will have a different falls rate, and some will be worse than others. Comparing orthopaedics with patients with a broken leg to an ambulatory care ward will no doubt have different results. So what you can do is take a snapshot of your hospital at that moment, go around collecting falls data for every ward and plot it on a bar chart. And as seen here, 24L and 25L have most of the falls in that entire hospital. And if we were to then plan a measure and try and launch an intervention, these would be our key stakeholders. The principle behind a Pareto chart is that 90% of your problems are believed to be caused by just 10% of the sources. A good QI project here would find where most of the issues lie and target their intervention to this area to maximise results. The final QI project planning tool that I want to cover is the cause and effect diagram. That is sometimes referred to as a fishbone diagram. In order to use this tool, you first put your effect on the far right. In our example here, we talk about being late for work. You then list the main causes related to this effect. So we can say materials, equipment, process, people and environment are perhaps the main drivers that lead me to being late for work. Each cause can then be analysed to look for separate parts that make up for this. For example, looking at the equipment analysis, there are many different parts including my car, toaster, coffee machine, hairdryer and alarm clock. From my earlier process map, I've identified my first project as buying a permanent toaster. However, if this was not successful, I can move down this stem looking at my coffee machine or my alarm clock, which might save me time. Alternatively, in doing my project, I may realise that a different stem entirely may be responsible and move on to my process. This gives me additional change ideas, so if I'm at first not successful, I can try something different in hopes of improvement. After you've planned your project, you may want to move on to planning your intervention. We talk about three main types of intervention, including teaching, resource production, and process creation. A teaching intervention is often one of the simplest ways to get involved in QI. A teaching tool is a rapid way of educating a particular group of staff. This may include a poster, a website, an educational video, or other form of teaching intervention that you can use to make a big difference in your practice. We can move on to resource creation, where we try and create different ways of doing the same task more efficiently. This can be an optimised clerking or referral system that can cut down some of the barriers and waste in the system, making your patient journey that much quicker. And finally, process creation. Every patient will have their own patient journey. They'll experience different NHS processes that can all be looked at and taken apart with project planning tools such as your process map. We can identify weak links or slow steps in a process that can be removed and ultimately improve the experience of that patient. I previously mentioned that there were two parts to the model improvement. We have our three questions: aim, measures and changes. What are we trying to accomplish? How will we know that a change is an improvement? And what changes can we make that will result in improvement? These all tie in to the second part, the PDSA cycle. This is often seen as a gold standard tool to use in your QI projects. We've already talked a bit about project planning, as plan is the first step in your PDSA cycle. You then move on to the do, study and act stages, and by acting you go back into the first stage and plan your second cycle. In quality improvement, we're always aiming to make things better. Rarely is our first intervention the most successful. We often have to do multiple cycles in order to prove that our QI project is working. Every cycle can be a lesson learned that can make your next cycle that much more effective and your intervention that much better and more relevant for your patient to improve the quality of care that they receive. We're going to break down the PDSA cycle into its individual parts and talk about them in more detail. Project planning is one of the most important steps. I've already covered some tools you can use at this stage. In addition, you might consider brainstorming with other members of your team. Try and involve lots of different specialties: physios, OT, nurses and doctors. All of them can offer a unique perspective into your problem and perhaps enhance your change idea. And try and collaborate, get a supervisor or a mentor. They may be invaluable in troubleshooting some of the problems you might have in your QI project. You might also consider collaborating with other centres or other wards. These can give you more data and help make your change idea that much more effective. You may also want to set yourself a timeline or a time goal in order to get all the work done. After you've planned your project, it's time to move on to the do step. The do stage is the active stage. This is where you go on the ward and start collecting your data. I would recommend considering who's collecting the data. Do you want to use a standardised data collection forum for simplicity? Then consider how will you collate all your data together. We'd recommend Excel or Like QI as a QI software. How often are you collecting your data? Do you want to do it daily? Or is it easier gathering the data weekly or monthly to achieve the same effect? After you've got enough data and collated it all onto the one chart or place, it's time to move on to the next section, the study section, to work out what exactly happened on your ward during this time. The study stage is also called the reflection stage. It's at this point you want to gather all your data and look at it to work out what happened. We'd recommend using the run chart as an analysis tool. We'll cover this more in Foundations Part 2. There are many tools that you can use to analyse your QI projects, including statistics and regression analysis. However, for this Foundations course, we're going to keep things simple. When you look at your results, do they agree with your predictions? And what factors could have influenced them? Would another cause address your problem? Reflect on your cause and effect diagram and try and work out if your interventions are achieving the effect you want them to. Then finally, we move on to the act stage. At this point, you've reflected on what's happened and you have to address what changes should be made to the process. Has your project been highly successful and it may be better implemented in a wider solution? Or do you tweak what went wrong, trying a different change idea? Once you've launched your action, you move back into the plan stage, but this time of PDSA cycle number 2. You keep moving through the do, study and act stages, and each time making your QI project that little bit better or bigger in order to improve your patient's journey. At this point, we're going to wrap up part 1 of our QI IQ Foundations course. In summary, QI is no longer a top-down initiative. All members of staff, students and trainees are encouraged to get involved. And QI is not a quick fix. QI is about marginal gains that can have a big impact for an individual patient journey. Project planning is essential, and some of the tools we've covered to plan your project include process mapping, Pareto charts and the cause and effect diagram. QI projects should use the PDSA cycles as a gold standard. Plan, do, study, act, and once you've completed one, start again. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this Foundations course into QI skills. I look forward to seeing you again in part 2.